The relationship between a microphone and its distance from the sound source is critical and complex. Not only will the distance between mic and sound source affect the mic's output level, it also affects its tone, sometimes in quite surprising ways. When a microphone is positioned very close to its source, it will tend to accentuate the low frequencies, producing what is called a proximity effect.
Every time I might be there, you can hold me.
Designers often try to compensate for the proximity effect in their designs, although sometimes this very intimate close-up effect is exactly what we want. The movie trailer voice, for example, when the desired effect is superhumanly warm and enveloping.
In a world where one microphone heard everything and one man was in control.
There's another related but almost always unwanted close proximity recording phenomenon called popping. Sounds that have hard front ends, particularly P's, where air gushing out of your mouth in a sort of audio explosion can produce an exaggerated thump or pop that is very uncomfortable to listen to. There are various ways to avoid this, from placing a finger between your mouth and the microphone, like this. Not really very practical if you're on television, of course, but incredibly effective in the audio recording studio, just doing that. Try this. Say Peter Piper with the back of your hand 6 inches in front of your mouth, like this. Peter Piper. You can feel the pops on your hand, right? Now try saying Peter Piper again with a finger held 3 inches in front of your mouth. Peter Piper. In reality, a 1/4-inch dowel suspended in front of a mic works well in the audio studio. There are many other types of pop shield, from the commercially manufactured circular frame, holding a layer of acoustically transparent nylon mesh, to the equally effective rough and ready do-it-yourself, cast-off, pre-worn pantyhose stretched over a coat hanger. If you don't have any additional paraphernalia available, sing or speak slightly across the mic as opposed to directly into it, especially on a problem word or phrase, but without moving any further away. Microphone designers try to reduce popping artifacts in their products, especially for mics intended for live use. Some condenser mics produce such severe pops that they're rendered virtually useless for vocals. Another unwanted artifact is rumbles produced by foot tapping or other extraneous vibrations. In recent years, elasticated cradles, like this one here, have become quite the fashion, which effectively isolate the mic from the stand. Pops and rumbles can be dealt with after the event with the use of high-pass filters, which we cover in the EQ section of the program. But, as ever, nip the problem in the bud if you can, so you don't have to deal with it later. Another important characteristic of a microphone is its phase relationship with other microphones. Without going into too much technical detail, two microphones might be totally or partly out of phase with each other, causing a drop in level at certain frequencies, or a phase cancellation as we call it. Here's an extreme example. PJ is singing into two mics very close together. One is going to the left channel on your TV or stereo system, and the other to the right channel.
I'm in the center, I'm in the center, I'm in the center, in stereo, in phase, in phase.
They are in phase, so their two outputs, when added together, will make his voice appear to be coming in the exact center between your speakers. Now, by pressing the phase button, found on most consoles or workstations on one of the mic channels, a very strange effect happens. You'll hear how PJ's voice now seems to be coming from outside the speakers. This is what out of phase sounds like.
In the center, out of phase, in stereo.
We'll switch the phase in and out a couple of times so you can hear the difference.
I'm in stereo, in phase, out of phase, out of phase.
If we now switch the mics to mono, we get an entirely different effect when we reverse the phase.
Now I'm in mono, now I'm in mono, in phase, out of phase, out of phase.
The phase reversal is cancelling out all the low frequencies. As I said, this is an extreme demonstration, but if we have one or more mics with a phase difference between each other, on drums for example, we might find that we get a more pleasing result by playing around with the phase relationship between the mics. I should also mention that a reversal of phase can happen in a cable, and the phase button is a quick solution to that problem, but it's a good idea to make sure all the cables in your studio are wired the same way.
Mic placement is one of the most important skills a recording engineer needs to learn. You need to consider not only the inherent sound of the instrument or group of instruments you want to capture, but also whether you want to reject other instruments playing at the same time or extraneous noise.
The ability to exclude or reject unwanted sounds is what engineers call separation. Good separation means the mic only picks up the intended source, while bad separation means other instruments or sources will, as we say, bleed through to the mic intended for something else. A tried and tested technique for improving separation is to place screens or gobos between the instruments. Screens are normally made of absorptive material and can sometimes contain glass panels so that musicians can still see each other. Close miking will increase the chances of getting good separation, but it might be at the expense of a lifeless sound that doesn't breathe. Quieter instruments like acoustic guitar against a hell for leather drum kit will always be a problem, and that's when we might consider putting the guitarist into his own isolation booth. Virtually all commercial facilities will offer one or more isolation areas for this purpose. In a home studio, you might want to consider putting a quiet instrument in your sister's bedroom or in the bathroom or whatever. You can also consider adding the problem instrument later as an overdub.
Whether to close mic or mic at a distance in order to take the natural ambience of the room into consideration is a matter of taste and fashion.
The sound you hear from a drum kit acoustically might be very different to the sound you want to hear on the recording. If you only use close mics on a kit, it will sound relatively small and intimate. And if you want to increase the size of the sound, you'll need to add artificial processing such as reverb or delays. Or you could simply move the mics further away, but it might be at the expense of separation with other instruments. Overhead mics not only serve the purpose of picking up the cymbals, they also add ambience and size. If we were in a cathedral-like reverberant building and wanted to capture the sound and atmosphere of that environment, a mic placed close to the source is not going to give us a true representation of that environment. We either need to move the mic or mics far enough away to capture both instrument and environment, or alternatively, add a pair of ambience mics to record the room sound separately in stereo. We then have the option of mixing the close and ambient components to achieve the best blend for the recording. One advantage of overdubbing, or in other words adding an instrument or part separately, is that the separation problem is eliminated because all previously recorded instruments are only heard in headphones and not acoustically. However, in some cases, overdubbing might compromise the feeling of the interaction between a number of instrumentalists playing together. The counter-argument is that a clean, overdubbed part with the mic in an ideal position will sound better and improve the overall sonic experience. Many bands will insist that the basic backing track is captured live. This was the case on Let It Be, where the Beatles' intention, well at least on the original sessions until Phil Spector got his hands on it, was to record absolutely everything for each song, including the vocals, in a single take. So mic placement was absolutely crucial. I remember Glyn Johns, the engineer on those sessions, explaining to me why he had angled George's guitar mic and amp away from the drums. It seems obvious to me now, but at the time it was, wow, will that really make a difference? Most of the basic rhythm tracks for Dark Side of the Moon were recorded with the 4 members of Pink Floyd in the live room together, while I remained in the control room on my own some. Some of the basic parts got replaced, of course, and there were endless overdubs, but I maintain that some of the magic of the album was created as a result of 4 people playing and interacting together. Some of the best orchestral and choral recordings have been made with just a single stereo pair of mics. There are special mounts for what we call a stereo coincident pair. In its most basic form, a stereo pair picks up the left signal from one direction and the right signal from the other. The 2 directions are commonly 90 degrees apart, and the mics are mounted right next to each other. Another minimalist approach is the mid-side miking technique, or MS for short. It's an interesting way of recording an ensemble or a group of singers. It involves a science a little complex to discuss in a program of this nature, but basically it involves a mic aimed at the center front of the ensemble, and then a figure-8 mic at the side at an angle of 90 degrees to the front mic. In simple terms, we combine the signals of the 2 mics added together with the same signals subtracted from each other. This gives an amazing stereo spread effect. There are countless articles on the internet about the technique, so if you're interested, check them out. Just search for MS stereo miking. For rock and pop recording, is more merrier, or do we really need so much choice? A question I rather cheekily put to award-winning Audio-Technica mic designer Jackie Green at a recent audio convention, the AES in San Francisco.
My guess is that you don't need 100,000 different types of microphones. And my guess is that a more experienced engineer can do a lot more with fewer mics. And it's just, I don't know if they're just becoming more accessible, you know, with people being able to record things on their computers, and they want more choice.
There's a wider price range as well, isn't there, than these?
Very wide price range. Very wide price range. And, you know, the price more or less represents kind of what you're getting, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. I've heard some really expensive microphones that I really was disappointed with, and I've heard some very inexpensive microphones that we sort of internally say, and said, wow, that actually sounded pretty nice. That actually did some pretty cool stuff.
We also visited self-confessed gear junkie John McBride at his legendary Blackbird Studios in Nashville, where, in addition to recording his wife Martina McBride, John's studio and equipment emporium has been frequented by such varied acts as White Stripes, Bon Jovi, Carrie Underwood, Mariah Carey, Kid Rock, Faith Hill, and many more. John's mic closet, actually he has several, would surely be the envy of any engineer or producer. But does that mean you have to have this type of collection in order to make good records?
We look at the engineer or the artist and the producer as painters, and I want to be able to give them every color on the palette. If there's a certain sound they're looking for, I want them to be able to achieve it here. I don't want them to ever be limited by the studio. So that means thousands of different pieces of outboard gear. If they're ever looking for suggestions, you know, we can say we've tried this and this and this, or, you know, they'll ask about a particular record that was cut here. What did they do on the kick drum there? And we're able to say, well, they used an RCA 44 with a Telefunken mic pre or an RCA mic pre, and such and such an EQ, and there you have it.
Necessity is almost always the mother of invention, and it's extremely important to grasp the fact that recording rules are always made to be broken, especially mic choices.
We had a guy in today. He wanted to know why we discontinued one of our drum mics. And I said, well, we've got this other microphone now, and it's good. And he said, oh, but it was the best voiceover mic I ever used. And I said, that's a kick drum mic.
The old school would say, if it's a mono source, you only need one mic. But with the advent of stereo in pop and rock, it became important to make a stereo picture better than early Beatles, for example, where the instruments were on the left and the vocals were on the right, almost laughable by today's standards. The demands of the stereo-hungry consumer, and now the surround consumer, might influence our decision to record instruments with multiple microphones in order to spread the sound throughout the listening environment. If you're going to be recording a lot of vocals, it's always worth spending money on a high-quality condenser, which you can always use on other instruments as well.
This microphone was built for Martina. There's no question about it. She sounds perfect on this microphone.
Many companies make copies of classic mics, which may be an economical way to approach their sound. Second-hand mics are a possibility, and it's well worth searching on eBay if you're looking for a particular model. Modern mics are unlikely to perform badly. If it's working, it's working. Not like my early years at Abbey Road, where it was almost a certainty that a mic or preamp would go noisy, or we would lose a power supply at some point on a session. However, it's wise to look out for excessive moisture buildup on a close-up vocal mic, which can adversely affect the sound and in fact do permanent damage. But there are always replaceable components to bring a mic back to top-notch performance. Mics and headphones often grow legs. Always check your inventory and keep them locked up. So what constitutes a good mic? The textbook answer is a flat response. A mic that picks up every frequency without being selective, that doesn't emphasize any particular frequency, and has no distortion.
A good mic.
Yeah, I mean,
let me tell you something. A good mic actually lets you get the sound that you're expecting to hear. It lets you capture whatever it is you're trying to capture. So if it's we've got a little microphone. It's costs $10 maybe. It's a little Omni thing. Maybe it costs $10. It's a good mic. Because it's very good under certain circumstances to do a specific thing.
Generally speaking, with the passage of time, we've increased the number of mics we use to record with. This console, which the Beatles used to record Sgt. Pepper on 4-track tape, only allowed for 8 microphones, believe it or not. When 8-track and then 16-track and then 24-track came along, accompanied by much bigger consoles with more inputs, we were more inclined to use more mics to put drums into stereo, for example, and to record individual instruments separately with their own mics rather than miking them as a section. Also, vocal harmonies would get recorded with one mic per singer instead of the group gathering around a single mic.
Miking technique is an art in itself.
I started in a time before all this technology existed, and you had to tune the instrument, mic the instrument properly with the right microphone, and start there. And that's still how I work. Not to immediately go to the equalizer, just throw any mic in front of the instrument and then go to the equalizer and make it sound right. I go to the equalizer absolutely last. If it doesn't sound right, I change microphones, I change mic placement, change the instrument, change the amp out.
And thus, we all know there's a difference. When you sing, if you want to sit there and A/B 5 vocal mics, one of them is going to be the best. But I'd rather have already finished the song by then. I mean, not to say that I don't experiment, but I know that it's not that big a deal. And that you can EQ out. If something's too bright, just turn down the treble. If something's not bright enough, turn up the treble. I have been backed into a corner sometimes when you're with like a superstar vocal and you only have an hour. You can't A/B. You don't have time. You'd rather spend that 5 minutes getting vocal takes on maybe a mic that's not sufficient, but will work. I mean, again, I'm the guy who says, what's the closest mic? We're gonna record a dobro, take that upper tom mic and just swing it over.
There's certainly nothing wrong with experimentation if the artist or session can accept that. If you're in a high-pressure situation or your budget is limited, then you'll probably have to make choices based on past experience. There's nothing worse than disrupting a session because of indecision over a mic choice. I've certainly spent many hours with finicky artists trying different vocal mics, all of which sound remarkably similar. And all I have to say is that I felt it was a waste of time. Some feel they need to go through every mic available. Ridiculous.
Mic pre is short for microphone preamplifier. The electrical voltage produced by a microphone is very small and has to be amplified from a few millivolts up to about half a volt to be useful to the console or interface. The amount of amplification needed depends on the type of microphone. Condensers are inherently the loudest.
Consoles normally have the ability to accept mic inputs directly with their own onboard mic pre's, but in recent years there's been a movement to sell mic pre's as external boxes, the manufacturers claiming that their product will sound better than the one already built into a console. It has increased the number of choices. Not only do we have to choose the mic, we also have to choose the mic pre. Frankly, using a lot of external mic pre's at the same time is a nuisance, too many knobs to twiddle. But if you don't have a desk, then the mic pre becomes a vital link in the chain. Some consoles might have an insert point bypassing its own preamp stage. The nice thing about external mic pre's is that you can carry your favorite mics and mic pre combinations around with you from studio to studio. Some mic pre's also contain high-quality analog to digital converters, which again might have particular characteristics you like, and you won't be stuck with a converter in a studio that you don't like. Digital mics? That's a subject for a follow-up series.